Confucius. At different times in Chinese history, Confucius, trad. 551479 BCE, has been portrayed as a teacher, advisor, editor, philosopher, reformer, and prophet. The name Confucius, a Latinized combination of the surname Kong with an honorific suffix master, fuzi, has also come to be used as a global metonym for different aspects of traditional East Asian society. This association of Confucius with many of the foundational concepts in cultural practices in East Asia, and his casting as a progenitor of Eastern thought in early modern Europe, make him arguably the most significant thinker in East Asian history. Yet, while early sources preserve biographical details about Master Kong, dialogues and stories about him in early texts like the Analects, Lunyu reflect a diversity of representations and concerns, strands of which were later differentially selected and woven together by interpreters intent on appropriating or condemning particular associated views and traditions. This means that the philosophy of Confucius is historically underdetermined, and it is possible to trace multiple sets of coherent doctrines back to the early period, each grounded in different sets of classical sources and schools of interpretation linked to his name. After introducing key texts and interpreters, then, this entry explores three principal interconnected areas of concern. A psychology of ritual that describes how ideal social forms regulate individuals, an ethics rooted in the cultivation of a set of personal virtues, and a theory of society and politics based on normative views of the family and the state. Each of these areas has unique features that were developed by later thinkers, some of whom have been identified as Confucians, even though that term is not well defined. The Chinese term Ru predates Confucius and connoted specialists in ritual and music, and later experts in classical studies. Ru is routinely translated into English as Confucian. Yet Confucian is also sometimes used in English to refer to the sage kings of antiquity who were credited with key cultural innovations by the Ru, to sacrificial practices at temples dedicated to Confucius and related figures, or meritocracy. For this reason, the term Confucian will be avoided in this entry, which will focus on the philosophical aspects of the thought of Confucius. The Latinization used for Master Kong following the English language convention primarily, but not exclusively, through the lens of the Analects. Confucius as Chinese philosopher and symbol of traditional culture. Because of the wide range of texts and traditions identified with him, choices about which version of Confucius is authoritative have changed over time, reflecting particular political and social priorities. The portrait of Confucius as philosopher is, in part, the product of a series of modern cross-cultural interactions. In imperial China, Confucius was identified with interpretations of the classics and moral guidelines for administrators, and therefore also with training the scholar officials that populated the bureaucracy. At the same time, he was closely associated with the transmission of the ancient sacrificial system, and he himself received ritual offerings in temples found in all major cities. By the Han, 202 BCE 220 CE, Confucius was already an authoritative figure in a number of different cultural domains, and the early commentaries show that reading texts associated with him about history, ritual, and proper behavior was important to rulers. The first commentaries to the Analects were written by tutors to the crown prince, and select experts in the 5 classics. Wujing were given scholastic positions in the government. The authority of Confucius was such that during the late Han and the following period of disunity, his imprimatur was used to validate commentaries to the classics, encoded political prophecies, and esoteric doctrines. By the Song period 9601-279, the post-Buddhist revival known as Neo-Confucianism anchored readings of the dialogues of Confucius to a dualism between cosmic pattern Lai and pneumos Qi, a distinctive moral cosmology that marked the tradition off from those of Buddhism and Taoism. The Neo-Confucian interpretation of the Analects by Zhu Xi, 1130 to 1200, integrated the study of the Analects into a curriculum based on the 4 books, Sishu, that became widely influential in China, Korea, and Japan. The pre-modern Confucius was closely associated with good government, moral education, proper ritual performance, and the reciprocal obligations that people in different roles owed each other in such contexts. When Confucius became a character in the intellectual debates of 18th century Europe, he became identified as China's first philosopher. Jesuit missionaries in China sent back accounts of ancient China that portrayed Confucius as inspired by natural theology to pursue the good, which they considered a marked contrast with the idolatries of Buddhism and Taoism. Back in Europe, intellectuals read missionary descriptions and translations of Chinese literature, and writers like Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, 1646 to 1716, and Nicholas Gabriel Clerc, 1726 to 1798, praised Confucius for his discovery of universal natural laws through reason. Enlightenment writers celebrated the moral philosophy of Confucius for its independence from the dogmatic influence of the Church. While at times he was criticized as an atheist or an advocate of despotism, many Europeans viewed Confucius as a moral philosopher whose approach was in line with rationalism and humanism. Today, many descriptions combine these several ways of positioning Confucius 1-2. But the modern interpretation of his views has been complicated by a tendency to look back on him as an emblem of the traditional culture of China. In the eyes of some late 19th and 20th century reformers who sought to fortify China against foreign influence, the moral teachings of Confucius had the potential to play the same role that they perceived Christianity had done in the modernization of ecology, or serve as the basis of a more secular spiritual renewal that would transform the population into citizens of a modern nation-state. In the 20th century, the pursuit of modernization also led to the rejection of Confucius by some reformers in the May 4th and New Culture movements, as well as by many in the Communist Party, who identified the traditional hierarchies implicit in his social and political philosophy with the social and economic inequalities that they sought to eliminate. In these modern debates, it is not just the status of Confucius in traditional China that made him such a potent symbol. His specific association with the curriculum of the system of education of scholar officials in the imperial government and of traditional moral values more generally connected him to the aspects of tradition worth preserving, or the things that held China back from modernization, depending on one's point of view. As legacies of Confucius tied to traditional ritual roles and the pre-modern social structure were criticized by modernizers, a view of Confucius as a moral philosopher, already common in European readings, gained ascendancy in East Asia. The American educated historian Hugh Shi, 1891 to 1962, wrote an early influential history of Chinese philosophy, beginning with Laozi and Confucius, explicitly on the model of existing histories of Western philosophy. In it, Hugh compared what he called the conservative aspect of the philosophy of Confucius to Socrates and Plato. Since at least that time, Confucius has been central to most histories of Chinese philosophy. Analects of Confucius, stone stele fragment. Imperial scholars, using a special style of calligraphy called Lai, inscribed the Analects and other classical texts on stone stele, which they erected in the Imperial Academy in AD 175. The stones were destroyed soon after during the wars that brought the dynasty to an end, and the fragments were buried for protection. They were later unearthed during the Song dynasty. This fragment depicts a section of the Analects and measures 52 by 35 centimeters. Lunyu, or the Analects of Confucius, has probably exercised a greater influence on the history and culture of the Chinese people than any other work in the Chinese language. Not only has it shaped the thought and customs of China over many centuries, but it has played a key role in the development of other countries that were within the Chinese cultural sphere, such as Korea, Japan, and later Vietnam. The followers of the teachings of Confucius were referred to collectively as the Ru school, which denotes persons who devote themselves to learning and the peaceful arts as opposed to martial matters. Some centuries later, when Emperor Wu R. 14187 BCE of the Han Dynasty declared Confucianism the official doctrine of the state, the Analects and other texts associated with Confucius assumed enormous importance. They were regarded as repositories of knowledge of how the empire had been governed in the model eras of antiquity and how the Chinese government system and society as a whole should be ordered. In still later centuries, the Analects was treated as a beginning text in the study of classical Chinese, to be committed to memory, and, when students were more advanced, studied exhaustively and with its lessons examined in depth. Thank you for watching. If you found this video insightful, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more thought-provoking content. We love hearing from you, so drop a comment below with your thoughts or any questions you have. Your feedback helps us create better content for you. See you in the next video.